You are tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Years later, do Buddy Bell's comments still hold up? I can deal with losses, but not like this. And lastly, we got more on Cole Ragans tonight. That's all coming up next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We always appreciate you making Locked On Royals your first listen every day. And you can find us on all those podcasting platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and you can catch us on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Jack Johnson. If this is your first episode, well, I'm just a lifelong Royals fan that has turned that fandom into a career path. I now work up in Kansas City at a sports radio station, and that's Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've got daily shows. I've got a nightly show or a once a night show weekly that I actually just came from. So a fun fact there. But I love covering the Royals. It doesn't matter how good or bad this team is. I'm always trying my best to give you the best possible content about this team. And even though there's 1 month to go, there's still going to be things to talk about. And tonight, you're going to see my passion come out a little bit more. I'm not going to be ranting. I'm not just going to go on a 30-minute negative spiel. I'm going to have some reasonings behind it. And I think by the end of it, you're going to find a silver lining. That makes a lot of sense. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. The Royals lost tonight to the Pittsburgh Pirates 4-1. Big whoop. You lose to the Pirates, a not very good baseball team, much better than the Royals, but not the Seattle Mariners that you saw over the weekend. You now have 94 losses on the season. 94. 13 away from the franchise record. In this team's 55-year history, they have lost 100 or more games 6 times. This is going to be number 7. But 0 have resulted in 110 or more. I think this team does reach 110. Still going to take a pretty bad month of September, but what else do I have to go off of? But if you're a Royals fan, and you're a scarred Royals fan, and I think if you are a Royals fan, you are a little bit scarred. The bad years in the 2000s, maybe some of the bad years in the 90s, the way they handled Beltran, Dye, and Damon, the way they couldn't ever give Zach Greinke help, the multiple managers, Trey Hillman, Buddy Bell, who we are going to talk about, Bob Schaefer, Tony Pena, across the board, guys that just couldn't get it done. But there's always that quote that sticks with us. There's that quote that us Royals fans hold on to, and I feel like it symbolizes everything of this organization. And we all remember the quote. And Buddy Bell said, "I never say it can't get worse." I look at this team right now, and I feel like for the first time in my Royals fandom, I'm doubting those comments a little bit. And what's crazy is that's not really a bad thing, okay? Because when I've watched this team this year, I'll be quite honest and agree with me or don't agree with me. You can let me know in the YouTube comments below, or you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. I just feel like this is a team that is really bad, but not 110 to 115 loss bad. Like I remember very vividly the 2005 Royals that went through 3 managers. That team felt a lot more hopeless than this one did. There wasn't much to be happy about in 05. At least with this team, I can be happy about Bobby Witt Jr. I can be happy about Cole Ragans. I can be happy about Michael Garcia. Now, there's a lot of bad. There's a lot of bad on this team, and I'm not trying to make excuses. I just feel like for the first time in my fandom, I'm going to go out and say, I don't think it gets worse than this. Not just because this organization is going to climb a little bit. Maybe I can, hang on to that optimism a little bit. This team may spend a little bit more in the offseason, get more competitive. I think it's just the averages, probability, when you factor all of that in. I mean, if you've been a Royals fan for a long time, you've known that since 2000, they've been a very bad organization. Now, sprinkled in there, there's 2 American League pennants and a World Series championship that nobody can ever take away. Flags fly forever. But I would say that in the last 25 years, we've seen some really bad Royals teams. 6 times they've lost 100 games. 6. 0 times they've lost 110. It's because in baseball, it's hard to lose 100. You have to have a lot go wrong for you. You have to be completely outmatched to lose 100. You have to be overwhelmed and dominated by the rest of the league to lose 110. I mean, get this. In Major League Baseball history, it's a 151-year history. There have been 23 teams that have lost 110 or more. The Royals and A's are likely going to be 24 and 25. It's why I sit here and bring you this episode and say, I don't believe it gets worse than this. And if it does, that's a lot of problems going on in the front office. There's a lot of problems going on with the ownership group, and there's certainly a lot of problems on the field. I mean, the Royals can't follow up losing 110 by losing 112 again. You can't do it. You got to get more competitive. You got to get better. And I'd imagine this team is going to be better next year. In fact, I'd bet a lot of money on this team getting better next year. It's not really that high of a bar to climb. It's not a high mark to set. This team just has to be better than 110 losses. It's why for the first time ever, I'm going to disagree with Buddy Bell. I don't think in my lifetime I'll see another Royals team lose to this magnitude unless there's some drastic turn of events again, where the drafting goes wrong year in and year out, unless they just actively try to tank. But now in baseball, you can't tank because of the lottery system. And you can't get multiple number 1s and number 2 picks every single year. Eventually be punished for finishing so poorly in the standings. It feels like to me probability and the laws of averages here are going to tell me it ain't never going to be worse than this. And why I wanted to open up the show and kind of spin it here for just a little bit of fun, an otherwise dismal season, maybe that is the silver lining. Because if you've made it this far, you've got 28 games to go, 27 games to go, 1 month left. 1 month left. 1 month left of games. That's it. That's all you have left in this terrible season. Now, maybe you're just like me, where baseball is baseball. You just want to watch the games, get away from work stress, life stress. I get it. That's what I do. I love watching baseball. Sometimes in seasons like this, I just throw out the record, and I hope for a good game. And sometimes with this team, you get it. Most times you don't. But losing to this magnitude, losing this many times, it's not willy-nilly. This is really hard to do. And the silver lining is, if you've made it through this, I feel like you could make it through any Royals season. But again, if you made it through the mid-2000s, you made it through 3 straight 100-loss losing seasons, then this really feels like nothing. At least you've had Bobby Witt Jr. and Cole Ragans and Michael Garcia, a 7-game winning streak sprinkled in there. At least you have that. But I don't really fault fans for not believing much or thinking that Buddy Bell's comments still ring true. That at the end of the day, it can always get worse. You know, you may lose 110. There's going to be people saying they're going to lose 115 next year. I'm not going to be one of those people. I'm going to hold a little bit more optimism in the tank. I just think it's crazy that right now I'm sitting here evaluating this team, trying to come up with content, trying my best to give you guys entertaining content for a team that's 53 games under 500. But I thought about this one, and it almost made me feel a little bit better, because I feel like for a lot of you out there, it hasn't been completely unwatchable. And if this is as bad as it gets, then I'll sign up. I'll sign up to believe in this thing. But here's another thing. If you shatter the franchise's record for losses in a season, you got to show now that you care. I'm talking to you, John Sherman. I'm talking to you, JJ Piccolo. It's the moves you're going to make this offseason to let fans know that even in an evaluation year, that's not acceptable. 110 to 115 losses is not acceptable from a professional Major League Baseball team. That's inexcusable. You can't be right there with the Oakland A's, who could barely get 3,000 people into their ballpark. This is a sleeping giant of a baseball franchise. We've seen what it's like when this team wins. Now you look at Seattle right now and Baltimore and how their fans support it. Kansas City does the exact same thing. Now I know that the team across the parking lot, the Chiefs, I'm a diehard Chiefs fan. I know this city loves its football, but I've also seen it love its baseball. And even in years like this, you grind through it. It can only make the better years that much sweeter. You're still listening to me. You're watching these podcasts. You're watching these games. I commend you. I support you, and I'm welcoming you with open arms because it's tough to do right now. But if there's any silver lining, it's that maybe Buddy Bell was wrong in the end. That this is as bad as it's going to get for the Kansas City Royals. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know in the YouTube comments or let me know on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Okay, I do need to bring up a little bit more negativity in this episode, and it's mainly from this last series against the Pittsburgh Pirates. Going to dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, let's give a shout out to today's title sponsor in LinkedIn Sales. Are you struggling to close deals? Cold outreach is wasting the time of both the buyer and seller at every stage, especially when sellers are using shallow and outdated data. Now, right now, you can try LinkedIn Sales Navigator and get a 60-day free trial at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon for a 60-day free trial. Let LinkedIn Sales Navigator help you sell like a superstar today. Just go to linkedin.com/lockedon and get started today. As this series wrapped up against the Pittsburgh Pirates, I really had one takeaway, is that this team is completely flat. And when you are 53 games under 500, you're going to have some flat games. When you've got a lot of rookies and second-year guys and third-year guys and veterans that are no longer big leaguers, there's going to be days you don't feel like showing up to the ballpark. But those are the losses I can't get behind. And I'm not a moral victory guy, but if you've followed me on Twitter before, if you've seen my content, if you've watched my episodes, there's been losses I've lived with. There was one against, who was it? It was an extra innings game. It was Seattle. The Royals came storming back after a brutal Jordan Lyles start. Bobby Witt Jr. had a grand slam. Michael Massey had 2 or 3 hits. Melendez had 3 hits. Salvi had a game-tying single in the 9th, and they blew it in the 10th. But that's a loss I can live with. That's showing fight. That's showing fire. That's showing passion. That's showing that the young guys can perform well when maybe the lights get a little bit brighter later on in the game. You need to come through with a big-time hit. It doesn't matter what your record is or what month it is. It's the big leagues. The lights are pretty bright there. Doesn't matter if there's 10 people in the stands or there's 50,000 people in the stands. Doesn't matter. Those are big-time moments, and they're especially big-time moments for young players. But this series in the 3 games, aside from Cole Ragans and what he did the other night on Tuesday night, 7 shutout innings, and we'll talk about him shortly, 9 Ks, only 1 walk. He now has 15 consecutive scoreless outings, 29 strikeouts in his last 3 starts, only 5 hits. 3 of them have been able to reach the outfield grass. Aside from that, this team was flat. And there have been times this season where I think I've seen this team look a little bit flat. And I know that a lot of fans are going to harp on Matt Quatraro and say they're flat because the manager's got no energy. Therefore, the players aren't going to have any energy. I don't think it's that. I think at the end of the day, a season like this takes a toll on a human being. I'm not trying to make excuses here because, as I just mentioned, these are the losses I can't deal with. These are the losses I will not support or try to make excuses for. But what I'm trying to get at here is that when you lose this much, I mean, these guys aren't idiots. They are on social media. They know what is said. They may watch podcasts. They may see the bad things being said about them. They may listen to live radio, watch what's being said on TV. They're not stupid. They're not closed off from that. Some guys may not pay attention to it, but a lot of the young guys, they've got social media. They've got Twitter. They've got Instagram. They've got TikTok. They can see all these things. And I think when you lose this much, it takes a toll on you. And for this series, you're not going to have a very big crowd at Kauffman Stadium. I'm not going to take any shot at the attendance. Because why would you show up on a Monday night now? Why would you show up on a Tuesday night unless Cole Ragans was throwing? You're 41-94 now. But even with that record, you got to show a little bit more life than this. We saw this team fight over the last month or so, even in the games they were losing. What was it, 10 or 11 straight games decided by 2 runs or less? That's showing fight. And even though you were 2-8 in those 10 games, that just shows that you're not as good as the other team. And we all knew that. We've known that since April. You're just not as good as the other teams. But if you're fighting, if you're showing passion, you're giving reason to keep fans tuning into your games, talking about you, tweeting about you, interacting with you, it's going to take a lot more fire and passion than we saw in this Pittsburgh series. And I'm not into the standings watch. I'm not into seeing if Oakland or Kansas City gets the worst record because it's a lottery system. Now, if the Royals finish with the worst record, they could still get the second or third pick. I'm not into that. I'd like to see the Royals compete in September. And today was just an all-around bad day for news. John McMillan goes on the injured list with a forearm strain or a flexor strain, I believe it was. That's not a good sign. So his season could be done. It's coming off a night in which Steven Cruz, who I raved about, not only on this podcast, but on Twitter, about his power fastball. And I said, it's not just about the results. It's about the stuff. He did not look good, but maybe it's jitters. I still like the stuff. I'm not going to back down from that after one outing. Bobby Witt Jr. has been slumping. Massey, Melendez. Man, Melendez has looked brutal at the plate over the last 2 weeks or so. Michael Garcia is slumping. Nobody in the rotation except Cole Ragans is throwing well. It is a tough time in Kansas City right now. Maybe not, because next week, next Thursday, the Chiefs open up the season. And maybe I lose some of you listeners, some of you followers to Chiefs content. I mean, I'm still going to be watching all the games. I'm a big football guru. Just because I tweet out baseball all the time and talk about baseball doesn't mean I don't care about football. I really do. But this is a tough time. There's 1 month to go. 27 games. There's going to be nights that we all have more fun. Maybe there's a couple more walk-offs in store, a couple more Cole Ragans gems in store. But it kind of feels like at this point in the season, you're getting into that territory of mailing it in, and that I don't want to see. I do not want to see this team limp into September and limp into the offseason. You need some positivity, even if it's just individual stuff. The Royals lose every single game in September, but the young guys perform well, which wouldn't make much sense, but you know what I'm getting at. I'd be fine with it, because that you can take into the offseason. This team plays like they did against Pittsburgh, against everybody else. That's not a watchable product. I mean, they lose tonight 4-1. It felt like they lost 11-0. That game was boring. Monday night was terribly boring. That was the worst Royals game I'd watched all year long. And that includes 24 of Jordan Lyles' starts. I mean, I had seen some really bad games. The Baltimore series, the Miami series were terrible. But that game on Monday night was just a snooze fest. 2 hits, shut out by a guy I hadn't really heard of before. Oviedo was great, but I'm sorry. I wasn't familiar with this game, as Shaq would say. But the Royals were boring. They were boring after Cole Ragans left the mound the other night. Coughed up a big lead. The offense has been putrid. You can't mail in games like this, not at the big league level. I know it's tough. I know guys go through slumps. It's all the human element of the game. But I'll be quite honest, the Royals looked completely disinterested in that series. And that's something, as bad as they've been record-wise, I haven't seen much of. They've gone in against much better opponents and held their own. They've competed at the plate, have competed on the mound. They didn't really do any of that aside from Cole Ragans competing on the mound in any three of these games. Angel Serpa was fine tonight, but again, you give up 3 runs in the first 2 innings, put your offense in a hole. If I'm going to criticize Jordan Lyles for that, I'm going to criticize Angel Serpa for that. Greinke was very 40-year-old Zach Greinke on Monday night. Mailed it in a little bit. And that's something that I'm not going to support in September. I'm going to watch every one of these games, but you're playing like that, I'm not going to spin anything into a positive. Tonight was ugly. I'm not going to talk about Angel Serpa. I'm not going to talk about Bobby Witt Jr.'s home run. That was a sleeper of a series. That was arguably the most unwatchable series all season long, and that's saying something. Okay, that's enough of the negativity because I do want to close out this episode on a high note because we are going to talk about Cole Ragans and what may be in store for him heading into the offseason and into surprise next February. That's coming up next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we close out the show today and then bring you a very early episode tomorrow morning, still trying to figure out how I'm going to iron out all those segments, but I'm sure we'll have more to get into on an off day for the Kansas City Royals. Want to talk some more Cole Ragans because he's leading our podcast episodes, at least over the last couple weeks. I mean, how could you not be thrilled with what Cole Ragans is giving the Kansas City Royals? And not to mention, Aroldis Chapman in Texas right now, starting to revert back to 2022 Aroldis Chapman. Not in the overall stuff, but in the results that we always bring up. Last 5 games, he's blown 3 saves. Last 15 outings, his whip is above league average. And yet Cole Ragans is doing this. How the Royals played that whole trade, that whole ordeal was brilliant. Going back to the offseason, I mean, some Royals fans and some baseball fans will scowl at that move because of Aroldis Chapman's off-field history. A minor league deal. Why are you bringing him in here in a season like this? Well, I think J.J. Picollo always had this envision that you are going to come in here. You're not going to be the closer. We're going to really increase your trade value. We're going to trade you, and we're going to find somebody like Cole Ragans. And I really thought when Cole Ragans early on got to Kansas City, I saw some of the stuff in Omaha, Royals Miners on Twitter. That is Preston Farr. Did a great job of breaking down some of his outings. I was impressed by the velocity. And when he got to Kansas City, I thought, man, this is a guy I could pencil in as a number 4 in the rotation. Power fastball, but the swing and miss isn't really there. But it's something you take a chance on. A guy with 2 Tommy Johns that was mainly 1 Tommy John that then kind of just snapped on him again before he got back out there in game action. But technically 2 Tommy John surgeries, a 25-year-old former first rounder back 7 years ago. I think, what's the big deal here? And we've brought this up before many a times. It didn't pop to me. Now, Cole Ragans was not a guy that popped in that deal. Now he does. He's gone from a number 4 you take a chance on to a legitimate frontline ace. I'm not exaggerating here. He is the most valuable pitcher in baseball in the month of August. He's got nearly a 2F WAR. That's ridiculous for Cole Ragans. No, it's not just the strikeout numbers. It's the velocity. It's the swing and miss. It's the spin rate. His fastball spin rate right now is the 3rd best among starters. I mean, there's been I think 10 or 15 pitchers who have thrown a pitch triple digits, a starter that is, after the 6th inning. Cole Ragans is now one of them. That's not just it's a good story. This is legitimately a number 1 guy. This is the number 1 of the rotation, and I'm hoping by 2025. You may disagree with me on that, but I really think the Royals can treat him next year as the guy with the best stuff, but don't give him the pressure of, all right, you've barely been a starter in your career, and you've never pitched a full season as a starter at the big league level. You don't go tell that guy he's a number 1, because the number 1 is supposed to give you 200 innings, probably 30 to 35 starts, and probably post an ERA under 4. I'm not willing to give him that responsibility just yet. I will give him that responsibility in 2025. As I've mentioned before, and actually on my last podcast episode, I think the Royals sign a number one starting pitcher this offseason, and they're number one, not a number one. There's only two in this free agent class. That's Shohei Ohtani and Blake Snell. Everybody else, 2s and 3s and 4s. And those are going to be right in the wheelhouse, right in the price range for Kansas City. But Cole Ragans is going to win August Pitcher of the Month. And he's going to be Pitcher of the Month, I believe, for the first time since Zach Greinke back in 2009. That might just be August. I would need to double check on that. I'm going off the top of my head here. But I believe Zach Greinke was the last one to win Pitcher of the Month. My good buddy Kyle Collier over at Sports Radio 810 WHB told me that stat. I believe him. I trust him. I just don't have the information right in front of me. So I give that credit to him, who is also a great Royals follow as well on Twitter at Kyle Collier. To me, though, this is a guy that is just ridiculous. And this really is, in a lost season, one of your true wins, one of your true home runs, no pun intended. I mean, J.J. McCall in this scouting department, this front office, desperately needed a move like this. To see the Royals make a move where you barely have a guy, you trade him for somebody who is now thriving, and Rangers fans are shedding tears over for him getting traded now, and the guy that you traded is faltering at the worst possible time for a playoff team, it never happens for the Royals. It's usually the other way around. They trade away somebody, that guy shines, or they cut somebody, that guy shines, they DFA somebody, that guy shines, and whoever the Royals get never plays well. This is quite the opposite. And it's not as easy as snapping your fingers and saying, well, just go find another Cole Ragans. The best thing is, it didn't take superstar talent to acquire Cole Ragans. It didn't take trading Bobby Witt Jr. or Maikel Garcia. Not that he's a superstar, but he's one of the better Royals players. It took a guy who was not on your roster until 2023. I believe Chapman wasn't signed until January or February. It was pretty late into the process. And he was a minor league deal. You paid him league minimum, and now you have one of the best starters over the last month or so in baseball. He looks like a legit number one. And the Royals so badly need that in their rotation. Now, it's health for me. If he stays healthy, this is Cole Ragans. But you can never 100% count on any pitcher's health. Guys get hurt. It's a tough thing to do in throwing triple-digit fastballs to a left-handed pitcher. And he can do that. And he's caught the eye not only of the American League, all of baseball. MLB Network did a segment on him earlier today. He is a must-see TV, and he was one of our podcast episodes last week. You know when Cole Ragans on the bump, you want to go out to the game. He'll probably have 4 more starts. Those are the only ones I'm focusing on of anybody in the rotation. I'm a little bit intrigued by Alec Marsh, but it's not in the same ballpark as Cole Ragans. Cole Ragans should start on either Monday or Tuesday against Chicago, and I expect him to deal once again. It's lining up to be a very strong finish for Cole Ragans in 2023. The dude has been on a tear, and the Royals really need him and Bobby Witt Jr. to just carry that into the offseason, because then you can go from there. You've got 2 stars at their position, and not just on the Royals, not just in the AL, but in all of baseball. That is going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. You can follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can find us on all of those podcasting platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and you can catch us on YouTube. We will be back with a very early episode tomorrow morning. I'll try to get that up as soon as I can, hopefully before noon. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.